Philippians chapter 4, and we're looking at verses 11 through 13 tonight, and we're thinking about this, what I'm calling a secret society that Paul introduces in his letter to the Philippians chapter 4. We're looking at verses 11 through 13. This church had partnered with him, and so he comments on that throughout these couple of verses. He says, "Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatever state I am therewith to be content. I know both how to abound, and I know how to be abased. Everywhere and in all things I'm instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who is strengthening me." I was talking to a friend of mine today about another friend of mine who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, 2020, the year before I passed away, and before my screenwriting agent passed away. It was a bad 2 years, 20 and 21. But I remember my friend who passed away in 2020 had this little get-together, and I think he and his friends probably started it, I want to say, in high school. And it had one of these kid provocative type names, the little club. It was called Den of Evil or something. And they would get together and they had certain little cues and certain little words they had to say and handshakes, and really it amounted to a big nothing. It was just a time to get together for pizza and soft drinks and this and that. But it was kind of cute. And I remember on one occasion, I think it was when I was in college, I knew him through high school and college and then later on in life. I remember him saying, "Hey, would you like to go to our meeting?" And I looked at him and I said, "Oh, I'd never be able to do that. I'm not a member." He kind of grinned, I said, "I don't know the password and I don't know the handshake and I wasn't part of the founding members and my name's not on the roll." He said, "Well, that's okay." He said, "You could still be part of it." He said, "You can get in with me." And I thought, well, that beats case. The very fact that it's a secret society meant that they're in the in crowd and everybody else is out. Well, there's something better than the Den of Evil. I don't know what happened to it after he passed away. Maybe his friends are still getting together for pizza and so on. But there's something better than any kind of a kid's, little club. And that's this club that Paul discovered. And not only was he a member, he talks about how he became a member. And he tells about how you and I are members, and perhaps without even knowing it. So I want to look at this with you tonight. I really trust it's going to be encouraging to you like it is to me. We want to look at, first of all, what he says about how he got there. How did he get into the club? How did he become a member of this secret society? What did he have to do? What were the dues? What were the code words? What was the handshake, et cetera, et cetera? We want to look at this. It's all about being discipled. Philippians 4, 11 through 13 is about Paul being discipled. And then by application and extension, by you and I and every believer being discipled the same way he was. Now, you can look at commentaries about this and you'll find different people say different things, but I think they do agree on this. Paul wrote this from prison. There's some difference of opinion on what city he was in. I personally think he was in Rome when he wrote it, but be that as it may, it was a bad situation. Now I want you to think about where you are tonight. Are you in a bad situation? Paul was pressed in, if you will. He was wearing ankle bracelets and bracelets on his wrists, and he was not a free person. He was not able to provide for himself, as we're going to see. He was between the proverbial rock and the hard place. And the sad part of it was, he wasn't in this jam because of something bad that he did. He was in this situation because of something good. And yet he was suffering for it. Peter talks about that. If you and I have to suffer, it's unlikely that we will. But if we do, it's better to suffer for righteousness' sake than for unrighteousness' sake, right? And that's where Paul's in trouble. And I think if you look at your life, you'll find most of the time you and I get into problems, not because we've done anything particularly wrong, certainly not willfully, but because of other people who have dropped the ball and gotten us in trouble. I know I've been the brunt of that for a long time. And it still happens. Now, he was uncertain at this point whether he would be acquitted or condemned and perhaps even executed. And it was uncomfortable because he was without the ability to take care of himself. He was dependent on other people. And this is interesting. Far as we can tell from what he wrote, this Philippian church was the only one that had a partnership with him. He calls it giving and receiving. In other words, he was sending them letters, he was giving them information, he was giving them teaching via his fellow apostles, and they were responding and they were ministering to him physically. Why are we still here after 35 years? After so many of our founding members have made the transition to heaven, after that plague decimated our attendance like it did other churches. If you're running 2,000 or 3,000 people and you lose half of your attendance, you've still got, quote unquote, a big church. But if your attendance or membership is 100 or less and you lose half of that, it makes a bigger impression, doesn't it? And yet, why are we here? Do you know, I just got a check in the mail the other day from a family. One of the members of the family has never, ever even entered this building. And they gave this church a very generous gift, and they're on the other side of America. What are they doing? They're basically saying, we believe in what you're doing. We believe in your local fellowship. We believe in your international ministry. We want to partner with you in something bigger than ourselves, something that's going to be here after we're not. And how did Paul keep going before the Lord took him home? The same way. So things haven't changed. So after thanking them, the Philippians, for their care for him and their physical support, he gives some startling information. Look at it with me. Philippians 4, 11 through 13. Not that I speak as to lack. Can you picture him? Lousy clothes, not really sure where his next meal's coming from, bracelets on his wrist and feet, and he says, not that I speak as concerning lack, for I, and that was bad enough, but he adds another ego. I learned to be content in whatever, plural, I am. I don't know about you, but I'm glad he said he learned. Interesting word, emathon. It's from the verb mantheno, which means I study, and we get the noun mathitis, which is a disciple. So, Paul said, I'm okay, but I want you to look at this with me because this information is too important to just kind of breeze by and just read it and then keep on going. This first word means to come behind. To come behind. Not that I speak as to lack. Hysterisen means to be without, to lack, to come behind, and that would include physical things like food, clothing, and shelter. Do you remember the advice he gave to Timothy, a fellow preacher? Having therefore food and raiment, and the word raiment there includes a house, a roof over your head. Let us therewith be content. Now, please don't misunderstand. I'm not for or against a financial portfolio, but I find it interesting. Paul does not give Timothy any advice on investing or saving or, whatever, putting something away for a rainy day. I'm not for or against it. I'm just saying I find it interesting. Paul is always about the present, having food and raiment, food, clothing, and a roof over our head. Let us with that be content. And he says here, he's not speaking as to lack. How could he say that? This is where it gets really interesting. I don't know about you. I'm old enough that I don't want to give anybody free advice. I would not tell you something that I don't know to be true. And Paul was much the same way. He wasn't telling stories, He was talking from real life. And can you imagine the weight of the information when this church got this letter and they heard him saying what he was saying? Really being triumphant in trial. And yet, what's up with this guy? He doesn't speak about lack. Haven't we been giving him food and clothing and whatnot and books? What's he on about here? Well, let's watch this. The first word means to be without. It was actually used of the widow's mite. Remember that story in the gospel? Jesus pointed her out. See that lady there? She's different to all these other people. Why? They gave out of their abundance into the treasury there for the temple. This lady gave her last mite. She gave everything she had to live on. That meant she was then without, period. The show was over. That was it for her. The second word, learned, as I mentioned, means to be discipled. A picture that I like to use is a martial arts class. I've studied a number of martial arts, and I've had a number of different martial arts instructors, but the situation's always the same. They will give you information, they will tell you how to do something, and then they will demonstrate how to do it. And then they will tell you to do what they did. You may remember in my little book, The Way Out, when I was trying to make sure I had the right health system and the right position finally for this second procedure I was supposed to have, I went to sleep praying and I said, Lord, I feel like I'm on the right road, but I would love you to confirm it if you would, some way. It's up to you however you want to do it, but I'd like another confirmation, please. So if you didn't read the book or if you don't remember, in the book I went to sleep and I had this dream, and I'm walking with an older martial arts instructor of mine from decades ago, and we're walking through this dining hall, and I'm talking to him about my health crisis, and it was like he couldn't care less. And it was very strange because in real life, he's a very loving person. I think he's probably in his 80s now. And I'm thinking, doesn't he even care? So we're walking through this. We go out the back of the hall, and he said, come with me. I said, all right. So we head off to this other building. And it turns out it's a new dojo of his in the dream. We walk in the door, and he says, wait right here. So I stood there, and he goes to the center of the dojo, turns around with this real, firm look on his face. He starts going through these exercises. They look kind of like stretching or isometric exercises. And he said, you do what I do. You do what I say. Whatever I tell you, you do. And I'm thinking, wow, so he was paying attention and he does care about my health. Wow. And I thought it was kind of interesting because some of the exercises he was doing, I had already been doing for a couple of years. And then I woke up and I thought, what on earth is that? And I waited. About 2 minutes later, it dawned on me, his middle name is the exact last name of my cardiologist. And I thought, there's no way on God's green earth you can make that up. And so if my doctor tells me to jump, all I'm going to ever ask him is how high. My point is this. He was discipling me. He was mentoring me. Whatever I do, you do. And then he showed me how to do it. And that's what this word means. So Paul was discipled. He learned this. The third word is really interesting. He said, I have learned in whatever, and it's plural, it means whatever things, good, bad, or indifferent, I am, to be content. And that is a fascinating word, content. It translates, autarkis, which is a word that was used by a philosophical school in the time of the New Testament called Stoicism. And the goal of a Stoic would be to somehow be independent of circumstances. So the Stoics took this attitude. We can approach life in a certain way, and they had different ways of doing it. Some of them used a certain diet. Others used a certain amount of food control. Others used kinds of meditations. Others would sometimes appeal to a certain one of the Greek gods. But the idea was there were some things that they could do to make them independent of someone else helping. They could be sort of almost, I'm the big I and you're the little you. I'm separate. I don't need anyone or anything type thing. It actually is a Greek word, of course, afto, which means itself, and then archeo, which means, again, to be content. So we think of the word, for example, autopilot. What does that mean? Like the other day, so we were out with some friends, and Solomon had parked his car over there, and this girl had not been around that model car, so he said, wait, and I'll bring it. So there he is on it with his phone, and his car takes off, and she's freaking out. It just drove right over and stopped, and then we just got in. We didn't even have to walk. So she was really beside herself. But that's what this word means. The car was a stoic. The car did not need outside help. It was on autopilot. It moved itself. And that's what these people wanted to strive for, to be independent of anyone or anything. They didn't get there, of course, but they could tell you how to do it for a price. Now, I noticed something else here before we move along to how you and I can get involved. Here's some other versions of that same text. I gave it like this: not that I speak as to lack, for I learned to be content in what I am, in whatever circumstances, whatever condition. Another version says independent of circumstances, self-sufficing. Isn't that exciting? Wouldn't that be a nice way to live, where good, bad, or indifferent, you're okay, right? But I noticed something interesting about that phrase. I looked at it closer and I thought, you know what? That's not literally what Paul is saying here, because he uses the term eimi, which means I am. I've learned, regardless of whatever things are happening, I'm content in my being. So he wasn't basically saying, I'm okay with my surroundings. It's not surroundings that are dictating. It's not good that's dictating. It's not bad. That's not what I'm concerned about. I am content. Well, how in the world is that possible? The reason he says this, I think, is to draw a contrast between him as a believer in Christ and Stoics who did not believe in the Savior, who believed in nothing or themselves or maybe one or two of the Greek gods. And they had these coping strategies. How many here know people with coping strategies? I see them walking. Some people are wearing helmets nowadays. Have you seen it? I'm not poking fun. I'm just saying they basically say, you know what? If I can cover my ears and listen to music I want, I can be independent of this bad news. Doesn't matter what the radio or the television is telling me. Doesn't matter who's giving me, political advice. I'm in my own world. I've got a coping strategy. And people do different things. Some people are, at the gym frequently, et cetera, et cetera. The whole idea is these people have these various things they were doing that would enable them in their mind to be independent of what was going on around them. But it's not really true, is it? Take the person who is, if you want to say, addicted to a certain kind of music. And when they're hearing that music, they're not upset about what they see, about their bank balance, about the doctor report, about a bill that's unpaid, because they're distracted. They're listening. What if something happens to the headgear? Then we have reality, right? Shocking us. Oh my gosh, my house, like I mentioned Sunday, my spiritual house was on fire and I didn't even know it. I couldn't even smell the smoke. I had the helmet on. Life is good. God's in his heaven. All's right with the world, till I lost the hearing gear. Now it's back to the nasty now. This is not what Paul said. He said the opposite. It didn't matter whether things were good, bad, or indifferent. He wasn't content regarding the things around him. He was content within himself. So something had actually changed in Paul's person. He had joined a special club. He had been discipled, and he was living as a member, really, of a secret society, a group of people different to the average person round about them. Listen to it. He continues here. And I know to be humbled, and I know to abound. Now, I like this because the way the apostle wrote this, sometime in the past, he came into some knowledge, and it stayed with him. Once he came into this knowledge, he was able to have humble circumstances without it affecting him. He also discovered at some point in the past that he could have more than enough. And that knowledge remained with him. Permanent knowledge. Again, to use the martial arts illustration, it would be like going to a black belt and the teacher says, okay, so you've been discipled. I've told you what to do. You not only learned what I said, but you practiced what I'm doing. You know how to do what I showed you. You don't just know it here, you actually do it. I threw you around 6 ways from Sunday. Now you're able to take another student and do the same. You've been discipled. So if I say to a first or second degree black belt in some particular skill set, do forms 1 through 5. Well, they can do 1 through 5. They know it all. Well, do number 8 or do number 9, and they'll go through that fight pattern. And the idea is they've kind of arrived. Now, how did Paul get here? Well, we said he was discipled, yes, but watch this. In everything and in all things, I stand initiated. That's not the same word that he used previously, to be a disciple, a student, a learner. You hear, you understand, and then you put into practice. So you act just like your instructor. No, it's not that word at all. Do you know it only appears once in the entire New Testament, this word, initiated? Once again, if we take his language literally, which we should, this happened at a point of time in the past. We don't know when. I don't know of any Bible scholar or teacher that can tell you when this happened. I have an opinion like they do, and I'll share that. But let me just again remind us what this word is. It's from the verb mieo. Mieo means to initiate into mysteries, to learn a secret, and then it came to mean to instruct or to teach. This is fascinating to me. I hope it is to you. It's from the verb meo, which means to shut the mouth or to keep a secret. Just like my friend's little club, the Den of Evil. You couldn't get in there unless you knew the secret words and the handshake. Then you could have the pizza and whatever else and do the dancing and all that stuff. But you had to know that stuff. I didn't. But I tagged along with him, right? This word was also used of well-fed animals. An animal that is comfortable, well-fed. So in modern language, it would be like Paul saying, sometime back yonder, I was given the password. Just like the Masons have certain secret words and secret signs and handshakes and all that. He said, at some point in the past, I was initiated. I was given the password. I was inducted into this secret society that not everybody's part of. And what came as a result of that is what he talks about now, and it's what's, thank God, available to you and to me, to every believer. I've been initiated into how to be full and to hunger, both to abound and to be deficient. Here's that word, am again. I am strong for all things. Do you see the am? So think about this. This is not like a deck of cards that he carried with him. It's not a credit card, you know. It's not something he had. This is something he was. Something happened to him. I am strong for all things. How? How? By means of Christ, the one continually strengthening me. I'm so happy he wrote it the way he did. So what he's saying is, his condition doesn't change with his circumstances. He's content in himself, regardless of where he is or what he's forced to experience. This knowledge, once gained in the past, kept him content in the present. And I love this. It had nothing at all to do with what he did. It had everything to do with what Christ was doing. Just the other day, as I was thinking about studying for tonight and teaching along this line, I had a situation come up. I don't know how you face awkward situations. The very first thing I do is to go into movement mode. Well, wait a minute now. Wow. Now what am I going to do? Okay. Now do I do this? What if I call him? Wait a minute. And it was so beautiful. I know you've had these experiences. It was so beautiful. I was driving in the car when this happened. Immediately, there was this very, very soft impression, not here, but down here. It just bubbled up. And it was along this line. Don't fight. Don't fight. Don't resist. And I thought, that's priceless information, isn't it? Was the problem really the problem? Or was it my reaction to the problem? And I thought about the martial art that I liked the best and that I taught for a while. One of the 3 keynotes is never meet force with force. Someone is coming at you, and if you're able to, don't be there. And they'll sail right on through. They might bounce off a wall rather than getting involved in a fight with you. Don't be there. Don't fight. I thought it was profound. And I thought back on my life. I hope maybe somebody here tonight or watching or listening can also relate. This is where we miss the boat. The event happens and we go into action mode. Paul put it like this: stop resisting evil, but rather be overcoming the evil with the good. Definite article, the good, not my good, not your good, but God. What a difference that makes. This had nothing to do with Paul or with what he was doing. It had everything to do with Christ and what he was doing. And as I mentioned, he says Christ is constantly strengthening him. He doesn't say I'm strengthening myself. He doesn't say I'm fighting my way through and the good Lord is helping me. No. He said all the while, Christ is empowering him. And let me just give you this word. En in English, in dynamunde. From dynamis, which is divine power, ability, and might. So you could actually bring that into English, and Paul was saying, I can do all things through Christ who is constantly dynamiting me. He's constantly strengthening me down here. So this is not something that he was doing. Paul was the recipient. This is something the Lord was doing. Other versions have it. With him that strengthens me, I have strength for all circumstances through the one who makes me strong. Another version, empowers me. Now, here's the punchline for you, for me, and for everyone. Like any good teacher, he didn't keep that to himself. He didn't hold this knowledge back, or like some of the Stoics, the philosophers of the day. They would say they had some information, but they wouldn't tell you how they got it. Or if they did, well, if you give me this offering, then I can give you a little more. Now, if you want step 4, 5, and 6, of course, that'll be another offering, and I can show you that. Well, how long do I have to keep going until I can be with you? We'll get to that later. Let's just keep up with the payments, and let's just take it one step at a time, right? Paul did not do that. He shared this knowledge with other people, and here's the main place he did it. You can write this down if you want. When he wrote to the church in Ephesus, when he got to the end of that letter, and he started talking about spiritual warfare and tough times, mentioned that when we first began tonight. Paul had some tough times. He was in a jail. He was in bracelets, etc. He was not free, couldn't provide food, couldn't provide clothing or a roof over his head. He was dependent in the eyes of man on men, although he said he wasn't. He was dependent on who he was in Christ. And this is what he says in Ephesians 6, verse 10. Be strengthened by means of the Lord and by the power of his strength. Do you know he uses the same word that he used of himself? Christ was indynamiting him, if you will. And he uses the word for believers in the church in Ephesus, endynamuste, the same word. Be strengthened by means of the Lord and by the power or strength of his might. And you find this happening then in the early church. Paul said it in different words to the Corinthians. Build yourselves up, or I should say, Jude said that. Build yourselves up on your faith, praying in the Holy Spirit. There used the word for building a house. Here it's being charged up with supernatural divine might and energy. And the last thing I think maybe we could think about is, when did this happen to Paul? Where did he get this information? He learned something. He was initiated into this mystery, this secret society that most people aren't part of. Most people are still listening, to positive affirmations on their headset or praise music or whatever. Nothing wrong with it, but there's something better. When did this happen to him? My personal opinion is it happened in Lystra when he was stoned. I think if you do the math, he talks in kind of graphic language to the Corinthians that when he was in heaven, he heard things it was not lawful for him to share. So I think he learned a lot of things when he was out of his body. We don't know how long he was dead. All we know is that he died. Church gathered round him, prayed, and he was raised up again. But when he was upstairs, he apparently was able to share some things like this. Here's the password. Here's the handshake. Here's the secret words to be part of this secret society where you no longer have to be up when things are up and down when things are down, where you can be content in yourself regardless of what's going on around you, because you've got, like the old TV commercial, a tiger in your tank, because you have God on the inside of you. I mentioned a little while ago now, after I came back from a film festival with Solomon, when I was up near Cleveland, we were walking from the beach up there back to the parking lot and then went back to the hotel. As we were walking from the beach to the car, I found myself just really asking the Lord internally, just kind of asking God, how in the world did Paul do that? I was thinking about Lystra and when he was stoned. If you read it carefully, when he came back from the dead, you know where he went to minister? Right back where they had stoned him. Now, I don't know what he was made of. Do you? Not a trick question. I can't figure it out. I had a pretty bad situation St. Valentine's Day 2021, and you know what? It took me a number of weeks before I felt even halfway myself. I was weak as a kitten. And yet Paul had the same experience. He died, don't know how long he was gone. When he came back, and can you imagine being pelted with rocks? No mention of medical attention. Dr. Luke doesn't say anything about treating him. He might have done, but if he did, it doesn't say. And then, to make it worse, he went right back where he was, to the very place where they had stoned him and killed him. What's that about? And the Lord told me, he said, the secret of Paul's success is 1 Corinthians 14:18. I thank my God I speak in other languages more than each and every one of you or all of you put together. He said the secret of Paul's success was the God who lived inside of him, that he yielded to and gave right of way to, the God that he allowed to build him up and to strengthen him. And that's how he was independent. And then I look back on my own life, I thought, you know what? Every time I'm stuck, if I'll quit trying to fight and figure it out myself, if I just stop, look, and listen, and turn it over to the Lord, he sorts it out for me without me even getting involved. And he's very creative, and he has lots of ways of doing it you and I would never figure out. So I think this is a wonderful thing. I think it's something that's for every believer. It's a society, if you will, secret, because not because God's holding out, but because a lot of us have just never heard about it, or people that are living this way never share about it. But it makes everything different, and it makes the load we carry a lot lighter when we realize God does not want us to fight. He doesn't want us to strive. If we remove that step, the bad thing happens. That doesn't mean we have to go push against it. We can stop and we can tag out, if you will, use a wrestling picture, and let the Lord do what we can. And we'll be content in ourselves, independent of what's going on, good, bad, or indifferent around us. And as you know, God met his needs, didn't he? Read the rest of this letter. He talks about it. Thanks for the gift, he said. So who knows what all they sent him, food, clothing, whatever, money probably. And there he was. But he didn't do it. He couldn't do it. He was literally bound, but he wasn't bound. That's a beautiful thing. And I think it's awesome. And I hope, we can enjoy the benefits of the secret society. Like I got to tag along with Ray for the Den of Evil meetings and pizza and whatnot. And even though I wasn't a member, he got me in. Any questions about this tonight or input? Yeah, Bill?
It's like when you're baptized and you're dead to self and you're resurrected and you come back up.
Yeah.
It's almost like that's the beginning of the end of what you become from that experience. You know what I mean? It almost works in the opposite, and you can't figure it out with your mind. And you get God in you like that, and through all the tribulation and problems, and each time it makes you stronger,
Yep.
And because I'm more like, I don't worry like I used to. I mean, I'm really not in charge. I hate to say it. Sometimes I act like I am.
We all do.
But this thing is so real that he molds you into what he wants you to be. And if you just hang in there, it keeps manifesting into more and more spiritual reality in your life, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not an easy walk at the same time, because we're still warned against the flesh.
Right. Yeah, our first reaction is to figure it out. No.
But you progressed through that.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't get myself out of that.
I hope I don't have to do that.
No, I wouldn't recommend it. I didn't care for it. Solomon, you had something?
Yeah, I found this interesting. I did some reading on Stoicism, and they actually have a common thread in their belief system about the logos.
The word. Wow.
And they consider it kind of the impersonal mind that is in everybody and is also separate.
Yeah.
And if you just yield to it, but of course, they don't want it as an actual person.
Right.
If you tell them it's Jesus, they'll say no.
Right.
They'll still worship their other gods and so on. But I find it interesting, like how close and yet how far away when you're not looking for God, you get substitutes that are kind of close,
Yeah.
but they still fall way short.
Like a mirror image, yep. Anybody else? We're going to come around the Lord's table. If you're giving tonight, that's great. We have baskets here, one in the hall.